Welcome to the Bled Podcast, the place to come for travel and food tips, cultural highlights, insider stories, and chats with locals. It's everything you need to know about Slovenia's beloved capital city. I'm your host, Slovenia's Ambassador of Tourism, Noah Charney. Let's fire it up. This episode is all about learning Slovenian as a second language. It's considered difficult to learn by many, but is it really so tricky? To find out, I spoke to two Anglophone expats to hear of their experience, as well as with two leaders of the Center for Learning Slovene as a Second Language, part of the University of Ljubljana. Whether you're just language curious or trying to learn yourself, you may be surprised at what I learned. I'll also share some of my own adventure stories in speaking the language, one I never studied but speak, well, fluently-ish, as long as it can be considered fluent if I have at least one grammatical error in every sentence. Welcome to the Bled Podcast, Learning Slovenian Edition. First of all, you can call the language Slovene or Slovenian. They're both correct. Whatever you call it, I never learned it properly. I optimistically bought one book, Colloquial Slovene, and sort of half-skimmed through it, and that was it. No, I learned by throwing myself in and speaking. Speaking like a doofus, yes, but Slovenes were so welcoming and encouraging, honestly surprised that a foreigner would try at all, that it felt good the entire time. I mostly learned from chatting with my mother-in-law. Hi, Bobby. I never bothered to memorize the declension endings. They remain my Achilles heel. I declined to decline properly. Those declensions exist in Slovene, but as an American, I'd never even encountered the word declension until 7th grade Latin class. The idea that the endings of nouns and adjectives change based on what you're doing with the word was new to me, and I've never fully wrapped my head around it. This is something you have to just sit down and memorize. But even if you say the wrong ending, in conversation at least, everyone will know what you mean. And at least so far, 10 plus years into my time here, it still passes for cute. I found the verbs to be quite easy to learn since there seem to be fewer irregulars, and there's a formula at play that once you get it, you can apply to every verb, or at least I apply it to every verb. I never bothered to check if there are irregulars anyway. So much of the learning of a foreign language is just jumping in and seeing how it goes. Perfectionism is your enemy. If you sit quietly, afraid to say a word unless you're 100% sure it's 100% correct, then you won't get far. Speaking as much as possible, ignoring the innumerable mistakes you'll make, that's the best way forward. And Slovenia is a perfect place to practice this approach since people are so kind and appreciative of the effort. Around 5 or 6 years into my time here, something clicked, and I began to give interviews and even host public events in Slovene. I'm not sure what the click came from. I hadn't studied anything. I think it was about the mileage. Perhaps I'd crossed the legendary 10,000 hours of practice that's said to be needed for mastery. But I've never been a master. I just felt good enough to do anything anyone wanted me to in Slovene. For me, living as a foreigner in a foreign language is more interesting and more fun than living in English. But even if you're just visiting, it's worth trying a little Slovenian. It will go a long way. My honest mistakes have often been humorous, and so I've written them down. During the pandemic, I had weekly Zoom meetings with a comedian friend with the idea of making a one-man show about my adventures in Slovenia, with a large part of it making fun of myself and the mistakes I made with a language that proved to be memorable. There are words that have multiple meanings, and I'm likely to think of the wrong one for the context anyway. There are false friends. The word brez milosti means without mercy. But when I hear that word, I hear brez, meaning without, and milo, meaning soap. So to me, it sounds like it should mean without soap. I guess if you go long enough without soap, it's merciless to your family members. Then there are words that I often confuse so often that when I encounter them, I hesitate to this day and have to think through which is which. Bratranec means male cousin. Prebranac is a delicious baked bean dish. I'm often confusing the two, and I once ordered a male cousin at a restaurant. Then there are the words retired, upokoyen, and deceased, pokoyen. I'm always getting these confused. So if someone says that Aunt Franska is upokojen or pokojen, I'm not sure whether to say congratulations or my condolences. I'll give you just one more example. In front of our house one morning, there were two snakes intertwined violently on the road. I couldn't tell if they were enthusiastically in a loving embrace or enthusiastically trying to kill each other. But I also didn't know if they were venomous snakes, and I had little children running around. So I called the snake phone hotline, Cachofon. How cool is it that there's a snake phone hotline? They asked for a photo of the snakes, so I took it and sent it in. They reassured us that these were non-venomous, but I couldn't remember which type of snake they said they were. It was either Smokulia or Kosmulie. One is a type of snake referred to as a legless lizard. The other is the word for gooseberries, and I still don't remember which is which, but I pictured myself calling Cachofon in a panic in the future and shouting, "There's a snake in my house and I don't know if it's a legless lizard or gooseberries." Then I'll sometimes make up words that I'm quite sure are real words, and they turn out not to be. I couldn't remember what you call a beehive, so I once called it Chmrlo dom, combining the word for bumblebee, chmrl, with the word for home, dom. Turns out it's not a word, but maybe it should be. Let's hear from a few expats who have learned Slovenian, as well as the two heads of the main center for teaching us foreigners how to speak this wonderful language. Mark Evans is an Australian expat from Canberra.
What are my experiences like as an English-speaking student of Slovene is a pretty easy question to answer, which is they've been fantastic. I was incredibly nervous when I first started as a student of Slovene. You hear a huge amount about how difficult the language is, the dual case, the archaic nature of it, and so on and so forth. And you know, that's true broadly. It is not an easy language to learn, but I was rapidly taken in by just how enthusiastic and professional the people teaching you are, and how outstanding the people that you're learning with are as well. I've been very lucky in that regard. I've had just fantastic teachers and co-students the entire time that I've studied Slovene, and it makes the world of difference. I'd lived in Slovenia for several years before I started learning Slovene and brought it up to a fluent level. And while Slovenes have always been very, very welcoming and friendly to me as an outsider, the difference that learning the language for yourself makes is truly fundamental. It is transformative to your experience of what it means to live in this country and be a part of its culture. As I said, Slovenes are a welcoming and a friendly people, but once you have taken the effort and that extra step to learn the Slovene language, their outlook towards you changes pretty profoundly. They recognize the difficulty and the problems in learning Slovene. They recognize that it's not a language with much utility outside of Slovenia because of the small number of speakers. And so they understand when you have taken that time and effort to learn the language to a fluent level, that it is a real demonstration of your commitment to Slovenia and to Slovenes. And it essentially means that they're ready to make that commitment back to you. Ever since becoming fluent in Slovene, my experience as an outsider has changed so profoundly because Slovenes are so much more willing and ready to open up to me culturally and as individuals because of my understanding of the language. It has profoundly assisted me and makes me feel so much more welcome in this country.
I'm often asked where I recommend staying in Ljubljana. My answer is easy: Hotel Mrak. Hotel Mrak is my home away from home in Slovenia's capital. It's a family-run, elegant boutique hotel with a perfect location, right in the pedestrian-friendly heart of the city. You can easily walk anywhere from Hotel Mrak. Like me, it's got an artsy vibe, and it also has an epically good breakfast that is worth a journey. Take a look for yourself at hotelmrak.si. That's hotelmrak.si. So how do you learn it? Mark took the official course for learning Slovenian at the Center for Learning Slovene as a Second Language. You can sign up for a course or learn more at centerslo.si/en. That's centerslo.si/en. I spoke with Jana Kete-Maticic, the head of the program, and Tanya Jerman, head teacher. What are the most common difficulties that foreigners tend to face when they're learning Slovenian for the first time?
Well, whenever you ask a foreigner what is the hardest part of learning Slovenian, they always mention declensions first, because most languages don't have them. For example, in Slovenian, the word for coffee is kava, but when ordering it in a bar, we would say kavo, prosim. And if we want to say, I don't drink coffee, we would say ne pijem kave. So we have kava, kavo, kave. So one word in so many different forms. And that's confusing at the beginning. And another difficulty can be the dual form, which most of languages don't have. And it's a completely new concept for our students. And sometimes also pronunciation can be challenging. For example, the words like država for a country or letališče for the airport, and very famous word without vowels, čmrl, bumblebee. These are quite interesting words
That's
to
my
pronounce.
favorite word. Chumuttle is when people ask me what my favorite word is, actually it's chumuttle, but I used to, okay, sometimes I invent words accidentally. And one I was trying to remember what the word is for a beehive. So I said it was a chumuttle-o-dome because chumuttle is bumblebee and dome is your house. Turns out that's not the word for it, but maybe it should be. But anyway, that's my favorite word. I'm glad that you mentioned it.
Great, but I have to mention now that not everything is difficult in Slovene compared to English. Slovenian has only 3 tenses, one present, one past, and one future. And when our students hear this, they feel a great relief, I think, at the beginning.
It's interesting with declensions and conjugations. When I grew up in the US, when we had English class, we did almost no grammar. And I know for Slovene students in Slovene class, it's quite heavy in grammar. But for example, I had never heard of declensions until I was about 13 years old and I started to take Latin. And English, I imagine, I mean, it doesn't have different declension endings, but it's a word that I had never heard of. Even conjugating verbs, I knew verb forms, but I was not something that I had been taught in school. And I'm interested whether your focus when you're teaching is on rules of grammar more or on speaking and, logistics and survival, or do you try to strike a balance between the two?
Yeah, when we start with the beginner classes, we usually start just with, let's say, common phrases and greetings, and we teach them how to introduce themselves. And we also, of course, teach them numbers and alphabet. But we usually at the beginning introduce international words like, let's say, limona or restauracija or auto, which are similar to other languages, so they can see that they already understand quite a bit. And later on, of course, also grammatical content is gradually included. We start usually with the verb to be and the first case. And then after that, we try to teach them many different verbs. And later on, we also add like fourth case first and then gradually also other cases. We always teach grammar in some context, so which means that they can use it in their everyday life, so they can also learn it more easily.
So you mentioned phonetics, and I was actually interested in this. If you're learning the grammar and you're using it in everyday life and you're getting some phrases, you're getting the alphabets, what are some of the sounds in Slovene that foreigners have trouble with? And I have a feeling I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to let you go through it.
Yeah, well, it depends on the foreigner, the language group that they come from. But if we start, for example, with R, Slovenian R is different. Yeah, in English you use another R. Yeah, and in French and in German they are different. But most of the people, of course, would say that ch and sh and j are quite difficult to say, and especially as we mentioned before, the words without or with just one or two vowels are very difficult. Also, for example, slaščičarna or železniška postaja, so the railway station, or maybe the word živjo for hi. It's difficult at the beginning. And maybe there's a word hčerka, which is also difficult to pronounce. And sometimes foreigners modify it a little bit so that we Slovenians can hear it not really hčerka, but something closer to hrček. So instead of daughter, we are talking about hamster. But for Italian and Spanish speakers, some Slovenian words with the letter h at the beginning of the word are strange, and because they don't have it in their own language. So, for example, for them, there is not really a difference between grem u hribe and grem u ribe. So I'm going to the mountains. So hribe is mountains and ribe is fish. So yeah, these are such maybe some funny mistakes. And of course, there are some words that are quite similar, but they have another meaning, like večer and večerja and zvečer, which means like dinner in the evening, or like moram, ne maram, ne morem, like I have to, I can't, I don't like. And of course, there are some sentences that are challenging even for Slovenians, like pešec, prečkat cestišče, for example.
That's the one you're supposed to say 10 times quickly to see if you've had too much to drink and you shouldn't be driving. Is that right?
Oh, yeah, that's right.
I have this thing where I do a lot of presentations in Slovene these days, but one of the things that happens to me is I'll accidentally make mistakes, and then people think it's funny or cute. So then I start to use them when I'm giving talks in Slovene. But they always start as innocent mistakes. And it's often because the word sounds to me the same, even though Slovenes distinguish a difference. So an example is žena, wife, and žena, thirsty, and moja žena je žena. It sounds, even when Slovenes really try to pronounce it, it sounds the same to me. Then I also have issues with a word, because I know that the declension endings change. I see the root word and I have an association with that same root with a different ending. So an example, Rok is a boy's name here. And whenever I hear someone named Rok, I associate it with Roka, which is arm. And because the two have the same root, and you can decline the word Rok with an A at the end, depending on how you're using it, at least I think you can. Every time I hear someone named Rok, I start to giggle because their name is Arm. And of course, Slovenes don't have any association like this.
Yeah, great.
The word I have trouble with, I think, is so funny too. And you mentioned that there's some words without any vowels, or rather, I think historically they used to have vowels, but they've been lost. Like the word for rye, the grain, is rj, R, and then je. That to me is so funny, because it sounds like the sound you make if someone like punches you in the stomach, but it actually means something here.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay, the dual form. This is the thing that it might be seen as romantic, or it's probably seen as less romantic if you have to take a grammar test. So I have two daughters. The word hačerka, which we mentioned, ends with A. And so what I'd like to say is imam dva hačerka, but that's not correct. Imam dve hačerki. I have two daughters. And the dual ending, it's just something you have to memorize. Are there any tips that you have that you teach to your students for surviving the dual form?
Well, at the beginning, we try to hide this romantic feature of the Slovenian language from our participants. At the beginning level, we usually teach them the singular and plural form. But it is true for those people who have, like you, for example, two children, two daughters. Then we just explain them how to use it. And unfortunately, there are not so many tricks to learn this, but we try to explain them that it's a really romantic feature of our language. And then maybe it's a little bit easier to accept this special thing in our Slovenian language. But maybe I can mention that some years ago, we had a participant from Poland who was learning Slovenian to translate Slovenian poetry into Polish. And when he already knew Slovenian well, and had translated some poems, then he realized that he misses the dual form in his own language because he could not express intimacy so strongly as in Slovenian the intimacy is expressed by using dual form.
We try to explain many concepts, for example, declensions, in a humorous way, so that they can remember them more easily. For example, when we try to explain the fourth case in feminine, when you have a torta, a cake, we say to je torta, first case, and then jem torto in the fourth case. And we try to explain them, but with this humorous way, and we tell them that when you eat the cake, your belly turns round like the letter O. They remember it easily. let's say at all levels, we try to explain the concepts in different ways so that they can use the concepts they learn in different ways. So through reading, speaking, writing, and also listening. And they should repeat the words as many times as possible as they can. Sometimes they say that you have to repeat a word for at least 7 times in order to remember it. And of course, we also use various didactic games, like games that you can play with flashcards, memory games, or bingo, and also some board games sometimes. But in the end, they also have to do classic exercises and write homework and repeat, of course, because, as we say in Slovene, vaja dela mojstra. So practice makes perfect.
That sounds fun, actually. It sounds like much more fun than you'd expect from a language class. I love that. I remember, this is a million years ago now, but when I first came to Slovenia, there was only one Slovenian grammar book that I was able to find. It was called Colloquial Slovenian. And so that's the one that I tried to basically teach myself with, and I was honestly not very diligent about it. But what I remember encountering was the objectively correct grammar of the sort that you might see in printed books or that a newscaster might say was so different from what I encountered in real life that I wasn't sure how helpful it was going to be in conversation. Certainly with reading it was. And so my question is there anything you can do as the teacher of a language? You're supposed to teach the correct sort of objectively clean, readable grammar. But then when you encounter people in real life, almost nobody speaks that way. And is there a way that you deal with that as teachers to sort of not have your students be discouraged if they go, to Gorenska and they are served lunch and they're served on a taler, which I always thought was the Slovene word for plate. And it turns out it's the German word that's just in the Gorenska dialect for plate, and it's supposed to be krožnik. This kind of thing that you encounter. Is there anything you do to sort of soothe your students so that they shouldn't get scared if in real life it doesn't exactly match what's in their grammar book?
Yeah, during the lessons, we have to teach the standard Slovenian, right? But we also warn the participants about some words that they might hear in conversations with Slovenes. For example, let's say a word party in Slovene is zabava, but we almost never say grem na zabavo, we always say grem na žur. Then, for example, the word pillow in Slovene is blazina, but I think you would never hear a Slovene say blazina, but poštar. Mm-hmm. And we also, at the Center for Slovene, during our courses, we also organize an accompanying program for our participants. And we take them outside of the classes. We watch Slovene films or go on trips or go see exhibitions in museums so that they can also hear Slovene language outside the classroom. Because with the guides, we also ask them to speak slow Slovene and then to translate the content in English so that they can hear the Slovene that they speak also not just in Ljubljana, but also on other parts of Slovenia, because, I don't know, we take trips to Maribor or to Primorska region. But of course, for participants, especially at the beginner level, it is very, very difficult to understand dialects. And we sometimes reassure them that even Slovenes have trouble understanding different dialects.
So what advice would you give to someone just learning, and how would they find you? Because I certainly would recommend that anyone who's going to be living here for an extended period of time sign up for your course.
Our first advice, I think, would be do not listen to Slovenians who say that Slovenian is difficult. And then the second one is, of course, to find a quality course where groups are formed based on the participants' prior knowledge of Slovene. And this is really important. And at the Center of Slovene, we do this. We give placement tests. We have placement interviews before the beginning of the course. And then we form homogeneous groups. And of course, they should have a nice teacher and learn in a pleasant environment so that they get good language foundation and also maybe desire for further learning of Slovene. Maybe for some participants who don't need to speak Slovene that well, maybe I would suggest them to try our online self-study course. It is called Slonline. And it's also developed by the Center for Slovene. there they can learn basic phrases and some basic vocabulary and grammar in a really funny and playful way. Yeah, and maybe another advice for those who start learning is to not be afraid to speak and make mistakes, because as we all know, mistakes are part of the learning process.
That's great. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for teaching all of us foreigners to speak this wonderful language. It's such a deeper immersion into the culture if you try to learn some of the language, at least at a basic level. When you're in Ljubljana, it's possible to live there for years speaking only English. But as soon as you get outside of it, it's a much more superficial experience if you don't at least try. I found people so welcoming and enthusiastic with any amount of effort. So it's really worth the effort on the part of us foreigners to do our best and get started. And one of the best ways you can get started is with a course like yours. So thank you so much for your time and for teaching us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's hear from one other expat, my friend and a cunning linguist, American Josh Rocchio.
So here are some of my thoughts on learning Slovenian. Before I get started, I should make the disclaimer that I might be somewhat of an atypical case, as I came to the table already with a pretty significant linguistic background, including having already studied one Slavic language before, as well as Latin and Greek. So I was pretty familiar with the idea of Slovene's complex system of cases and everything like that. But nonetheless, I hope that I can share some useful thoughts. As one of the smallest countries in Europe, both in terms of land and population number, historically speaking, Slovenes were much more likely to learn a foreign language than a foreigner was likely to learn Slovene. This has two interesting effects in the modern day. One is that you will be a statistical outlier if you learn any Slovene at all, and they will be thrilled to hear you using Slovene, and a lot of times they will be very impressed and satisfied to see a foreigner in this country using any Slovene at all. But the second effect is that there are some myths that arise about Slovenian. Slovenians tend to think that their language is especially difficult, and I guess that there might be some truth to that, in the sense that if you don't have a very strong socioeconomic motivator for learning a language, it is indeed difficult to do so. And so, historically speaking, again, it might be true that populations here or coming through or neighbors might have found Slovenian difficult because they had no real incentive to learn it. And so Slovenes tend to think that their language is really hard. And so again, this makes a gift to you, because if you can manage to learn any Slovene, they'll think that that you're doing really well. But it's not really true. Slovene, just like any of the other 6,000 to 12,000 languages on the planet, depending on how you do your math, is in fact a language. And you can learn it just like you can learn Spanish, or just like you can learn Chinese, or just like you can learn Russian or French. If you put in the hours, you can learn it quickly. If you don't put in the hours, you won't learn it. And that's the only thing that makes a language difficult, whether or not you can, find the time to exercise it. But here, you'll definitely find that people will be happy to engage with you. They might have a problem at first just because they will not be used to conversing with foreigners in Slovenian. But once you tell them, hey, no, I really want to use this language with you, they'll be delighted. And so I encourage you very much to do so. Now, as far as some of the things that do make Slovene kind of unique, or at least very interesting, I should definitely mention the dual number. Instead of just having a singular and a plural form here for nouns and verbs, they also have a special form for things that come in two. Slovenes, again, tend to think that this is a very difficult concept. I don't think it's a very difficult concept. I think it's just a very nice one, a romantic one. It lends itself very well to poetic expression when you see things in twos, or it's very clear when you say, we did this, if you mean you and your partner, for instance, or you and a larger group of people. It makes for some clearer communication and, like I said, poetic communication. But don't worry about it. Just try to use it if you hear it, and just like the singular and the plural, you'll eventually get it. I should also mention the use of foreign expressions in Slovenian. So again, as a historically small country surrounded by larger, more socioeconomically influential neighbors, there have been influxes of loan words into Slovenian from all periods and all directions. So the longer you'll hear, you'll soon realize that you'll need to learn a smattering of German expressions, Croatian expressions, Italian expressions. And that just adds to sort of the fun of the mix, because you get a flavor of all the neighbors that surround this part of the world. I should also mention that there's a tremendous amount of English expressions in modern colloquial Slovenian. There are definitely people who try to speak a cleaner version that avoids all of this English influence, but sometimes you find that it's very hard to go more than a couple of sentences without resorting to an English expression or just using one out of laziness. But yeah, like I said, to use Slovene, you're always aware that there are some expressions or verbs or nouns or something like that that just come from a different language, and yeah, it's interesting and fun. One thing that can be a little bit interesting, especially for maybe English speakers, is some of the phonetics of Slovenian are often challenging for the unsuspecting foreigner. One of the most extreme examples is in the verb for to scramble an egg, which in Slovenian is razvrkljati. So you get the consonant cluster, which just means many consonants in a row, of zvrklji, razvrkljati, to scramble an egg. So yeah, that's definitely difficult. Another thing that's difficult, or at least that I found difficult, was having words end in an H sound. So, like, for instance, if I wanted to say in the pretty houses in Slovenian, I would need to say lepih hišah. And before I mastered that sound, I was definitely overdoing it and sort of choking on it, and it sounded more like velepih hišah. And so, yeah, you kind of need to get used to that. But yeah, if you can approximate the sounds, as long as you are using the right words in the right forms, I think in almost any language, the speakers there will forgive you for having an imperfect accent if you're getting all the other stuff correct. So even if you can't pronounce all the sounds, or if some of the consonant clusters are giving you trouble, just do your best and put the right words together in the right order, and you'll be fine. There's a word that I've said that I would love to adopt into English if I could. And that word is surprisingly not some beautiful noun or some clever verb, but it's a simple particle. And the word is pach. It's a really cool word because it can mean a whole gamut of things, but they all sort of mean that's just the way it is. And I just love that you can encapsulate that whole meaning into one word. So like, you know, if somebody asks you why you prefer chocolate to vanilla, you can just say pach, and everything is understood. And I just find it a really cool word, and I would love to adopt it into English. Another one of my very favorite words in Slovene is a noun, or I guess a noun formed from a verb, but šelestenje, I think is a beautiful word. It means like the rustling of the leaves, or maybe even like the rustling of like grass blades or something like that in the wind. And I just think it's a really beautiful word.
If you know another Slavic language, then this will be a piece of cake. But even if you don't, learning Slovenian to a functional level is not as hard as it initially seems to be to so many. The key is dedication and having a really good reason to learn it. While it may not be the most universally useful for world travel, it will vastly deepen your experience of visiting or living in Slovenia. You'll also find that locals are truly delighted with any concerted effort. So even the baby steps you make in speaking will be rewarded with big smiles and encouragement. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Ljubljana Podcast. The Ljubljana Podcast is brought to you by Hotel Mrak, the best boutique art hotel in the center of Ljubljana. This podcast is produced by Urška Charney and hosted by Noah Charney. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.